Trump out of the White House.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
I get that that's where the media likes to go.
No, it's not. It's where many of the people we've talked to here like to go.
I report on the biggest stories from around the world. This is a town that is effectively encircled by the Russians.
You say it's all fabrication, what's happening in Bucha?
Destroyed my nation.
We take you to the heart of stories that shape our planet. I can hear now quite a few explosions in the distance here in Jerusalem. A very violent series of confrontations here. What do you think of ISIS?
Everybody here knows the truth of ISIS.
Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. We can now reveal details of a key speech to be made by the Prime Minister tomorrow, when he will declare that the return to Parliament will not be business as usual. Keir Starmer has invited people he met on the campaign trail to the speech in the Downing Street Rose Garden. He will compare his task as Prime Minister to the communities that rallied to clean up in the wake of this month's rioting. He'll also warn that things will get worse before they get better, as Labour works to fix what he will denounce as 14 years of rot under the Conservatives. Now to our press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with broadcaster and commentator Ali Mirage and deputy political editor at The Guardian, Jessica Elgot. So let's see what is on some of those front pages first. And the Metro pays tribute to former England men's football manager Sven Eriksson after his death at the age of 76. It's been fantastic. The Mirror highlights emotional words from Eriksson's last TV interview. The Express leads on claims by Nigel Farage that there'll be shocks to come in Labour's first budget. Military training cut back to fund pay raises. That's on the front page of the Daily Mail. The Times writes that police officers have almost entirely given up punishing shoplifters, while according to The Telegraph, police are increasingly letting knife and sex offenders escape prosecution if they apologise. The Guardian, Jess's paper, highlights what it calls a staggering rise in anxiety among children. The Eye reports that there are safety fears at one of the UK's largest care providers after it was bought by Kuwait's state fund. And the FT says the world's leading defence contractors will benefit from a surge in government orders for weapons as global tensions rise. Just a reminder, by scanning the QR code you will see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us chat about them. And I am joined by Deputy Political Editor at The Guardian, Jess Elgot, and broadcaster and commentator Ali Mirage. It's lovely to see you both. Thanks for joining me. Let's focus on that sad story about Sven Eriksson, Jess, which is on the front page of the Metro.
And obviously he revealed, I think it was in January, that he was terminally ill and didn't expect to live for more than a year. But it still comes as a real shock. He was a real kind of figure in British footballing history, that golden generation, which never quite lived up to the expectations that there was for sort of Owen, Beckham, Rooney. But it did give us some amazing footballing moments. It was that 5-1 win over Germany was just one that everyone still remembers.
I was there.
Yeah,
I
really?
watched it.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
I've been dining out on that this evening, and I was there as a journalist, and I interviewed Sven, I interviewed Beckham, and then, well, we were thinking, you know, hang on, England are playing Germany in Germany. This is going to be a difficult one, and then. Well, they pulled it out of the bag. It was extraordinary.
An extraordinary night. It really was. But I mean, he also, you know, a career in England that went on after managing the national team, of course, but was really marred by his treatment by a lot of tabloids, and I think that's going to make it quite difficult for some of the papers, perhaps, to report things tonight because you know there was so much intrusion into his private life as a man who was. Wasn't married. It was not like he was necessarily doing anything untoward. And he was someone. I don't think it's speaking ill of the dead to say that he made some interesting personal decisions throughout his life, and some that were very controversial. But there was sort of a particular tabloid savagery, I think, around his personal life.
Yes, and the victim of some of that also, Ali, was Nancy Dell'Olio, his partner, and she's put out a really nice post on Instagram this evening, remembering him fondly. Obviously, we haven't been together for a long, long time, but still, that seems to be the tone here. He was bemused at some of this treatment, but he wasn't negative about it. Seemed to have just taken it in his stride and seemed to be a nice guy.
He was, and I think there are two things, really, that stick out for me when it comes to Sven. Firstly, was his style as a manager. I think when he came in, it was on the back of Keegan. I mean, it wasn't exactly the easiest time for England at the time he came in. And it was a sort of decency of the man. I mean, he wasn't a shouty manager, but he sort of, in his very calm manner, he was quite traditional in the way he played as well. But he was a golden generation of footballers. I mean, Jess is right, they didn't quite reach the heights that we thought they could. But it was like the class of these people, Ferdinand, Owen, Beckham, all these guys he worked with. And the interesting thing is, the way not only he managed them, but also the way he managed his illness as well. So he's done this documentary. He said, "Don't be sorry, smile. You know, I'm not going to let this get to me. You know, there's no point. You've got to live your life to the full," and all these things. And he actually recounted how David Beckham came to see him the other day with a bunch of different bottles of wine, one from his birth date. So quite a rare bottle of wine. So it's quite decent. Rooney's come out and also, you know, been very touching. So I think he'll be remembered for a very decent manager. And he had a lot of success, I mean, 3 quarter-finals. And he also had a very distinguished career, we should remember, before he was even at England.
Oh, absolutely.
With Lazio and Benfica and others and Gothenburg. So, you know, he'll go down in history as a decent person and a good manager.
Oh, and one of those people who is simply known by his first name. You say Sven, everyone knows who you are talking about. Let's move on, Jess, to the Mirror. And this is following on from that story we just mentioned there at the start of this half hour about Keir Starmer's speech tomorrow. It had already been briefed in, already been trailed that he's going to say things are going to get worse before they get better, and that's featuring on the Mirror tomorrow.
There's a little bit more optimism in the words that we're hearing about that he'll say next time. He's going to draw upon the audience who are going to be in the Downing Street Rose Garden are going to be people he's met on the campaign trail. I spent quite a lot of time with him on that campaign trail on the Labour bus. A lot of the time he was speaking to sort of nurses, firefighters, small business owners. That was the kind of Labour target audience for a lot of what they were talking about. You know, ordinary working people.
Toolmakers.
It was always toolmakers. Exactly. We heard plenty about those over the course of the campaign. And he'll also sort of draw upon the riots earlier this month and say, actually, the cure for what we saw there, is actually in the response people did after the riots. So the communities coming together, cleaning things up, and he's going to draw a parallel with that with what the government, what he hopes the government will do to the state of the country. I'm not sure how much the previous occupants of Downing Street will like that comparison. But it's an interesting one to try and draw on.
But it does bear comparison with the big society of the early
Very
Conservative
similar.
government, doesn't
Very
it? You know,
similar.
this is like David Cameron kind of politics, isn't it, Ali?
Well, you know, look, Starmer has got a job to do, which is to say that things were so bleak, so bleak after 14 years of Tory rule that effectively they've left rubble in their wake, and this is going to be now rising from the ashes. So, look, it's hardly things going to get better by D-Ream at 1997 at the Royal
Things are going to get
Festival Hall.
worse.
Well,
first.
basically, things are going to get worse, and they might get better at some point in the future. But there we are. Look, the reality is that the Tories did leave a mess. They did have COVID. You can understand that. 2.7 billion of public debt at the moment, 100% debt to GDP, productivity in the gutter. We haven't had growth in this country for years. Liz Truss tried it in the summer internship, but didn't last very long. So, you know, it's not a great backdrop. But we've seen a direction of travel already from this government about some of the decisions it's making. The pensioners one has gone down like a lead balloon with a lot of people. These are decisions they've made. They've given in to the unions already. You might say, well, they need to do that because they need to get the country back on its feet. But they have, and that might actually give succor to more unions to come out with some more punchy demands. Look, it's not an easy backdrop. Let's see what he says. I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, but I can already see the direction of travel they're going in.
Yeah, well, so Nigel Farage thinks he can as well, because according to the front page of the Express, he has teased what Labour might put in their budget.
Yeah.
How on earth does he know that, Jess?
Well, he doesn't. Is the real answer to that? I mean, he's saying that they'll be making economic decisions on the basis of who will vote for them in the next election. What an extraordinary thing to do. I mean,
Well, shock horror.
Genius campaign.
So it's offering, pay rise. What he's talking about, obviously, there is the settling with the unions, which of course Rachel Reeves calculated. You know, you've got a choice to make, which is a political one, but also an economic one, which is that you can settle the strikes and pay, and then you know the upfront costs, or you can risk industrial action where you don't know how this cost will spiral and it may end up costing you more. And she's chosen the former option. She's a cautious, as she tells us back in the.
But they didn't get any changes,
she...
Jess, in the from ASLEF in terms of the workers, the way the workers are, the rights and things that they were trying to negotiate. Exactly, they didn't do anything on that. They just caved.
And clearly, what they felt the public's priority was to get these
junior doctors as well,
and the same with junior doctors.
Well, they're talking about growth. They're talking about productivity. Maybe they're taking a gamble. If we pay this now, that productivity and growth will increase as a result of trains running on time and everything else. But just to come back to you on this, Jess, I mean, the fact that this has been briefed in, this has been trailed for a couple of days now, what does that tell you about how this Labour government is going to operate in terms of talking to the lobby, talking to journalists?
Well, I think that one of the most important political priorities for the people around Keir Starmer is to spend the next few months really bedding it into the public consciousness that the decision they're making is as a result of the inheritance of the Tories. And I think, that is, I think, already, they're fighting a winning battle in that regard. But, they are learning from the strategy that David Cameron and George Osborne employed, which was that Labour had broken things, that austerity was the only answer to fix the chronic problems of overspending from the last Labour government, whether that was, true or not, and that sort of put Labour out of power for a decade, more than a decade, and that's exactly what Keir Starmer's intending to replicate.
There was no money left then, and there's no money left now.
Even less.
Thank you both very much indeed for the time being. We'll come back in a second. More to come from the papers very shortly, including this on the front page of The Guardian, looking at the rise in anxiety amongst our children. We'll be right back.
Liam Gallagher is touring, definitely maybe at the moment without Noel. It's creating a lot of buzz. He's made a few comments on stage, sort of maybe giving a clue to maybe a reunion. I would have bet a week ago heavily a lot of money against Oasis ever getting back together. I'm under the impression they still hate each other. And if this does happen, it's going to be for a lot of money and no other reason. Noel Gallagher got divorced last year. It's rumoured to be around £20 million settlement, which even for him will sting a bit, even with those Wonderwall royalties still rolling in. This is an album, What's the Story, Morning Glory, turns 30 next year. This is their biggest selling album, and it's still, I think, number 45 in the album charts now. That's an extraordinary thing, and it's a seminal moment in the 90s for a lot of people, and there will be a clamour for tickets should it happen next year. I mean, isn't this the best publicity ever? Just a little breadcrumb trail of hints leading up to maybe a big announcement. And what better time to make it than Q4 of the year, just in the build up to Christmas when everyone gets really excited and buys people tickets for birthdays and Christmas. But Noel Gallagher did say the only way he'd get Oasis back together is for £100 million. I mean, he has said that himself. I would love it to happen, don't get me wrong. I'm a massive Oasis fan, definitely maybe, and What's the Story, Morning Glory in particular, just like everyone else. But I don't think we should expect new material. I'll say that much. I managed to see them headline Glastonbury back in, I think it was 2004, and they weren't getting on and their heart wasn't in it already at that point. But I think with all the water that's gone under the bridge in the last few years and the way that the 90s is really getting a comeback at the moment, Blur, let's not forget, played Wembley Stadium twice last year. The rumour is Oasis have booked 10 dates at Wembley Stadium, which would beat Taylor Swift's 8 dates from this year. So a lot of upset Swifties as well.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview here on Sky News. Joining me here in the studio, broadcaster and commentator Ali Mirage and the deputy political editor at The Guardian, Jess Elgert. Ali, let's get straight to the front page of tomorrow's Financial Times. And this whole situation with Telegram and its founder being arrested in France rumbles on. Emmanuel Macron has joined in.
Emmanuel Macron's joined in because Pavel Durov, who's the founder of Telegram, this social media app, which is very popular in certain quarters.
Well, you mean with criminals? That's the accusation.
Well, indeed, the argument was made that he was charged because there is certain information floating around which is beyond the pale, including alleged criminal activity, including spreading of child sexual abuse material, drug trafficking, fraud and money laundering. And this has been made up by the Russians. This individual was Russian-born, but he's a French Emirati citizen. It was being made out by the Russians that it was politically motivated rather than judicially motivated. So Macron, President Macron, has stepped in saying, no, it's got nothing to do with politics. This is about due process. That's why we've arrested him. But it seems to be causing a bit of a diplomatic ruckus.
I mean, ironic that Russia would say this is politically motivated, not judicially motivated, given some of their recent behaviour in terms of who they've arrested and locked up and then done deals to release.
Well, indeed. And you know that President Putin is not exactly one to treat dissidents particularly well, but this is turning into a diplomatic issue, and that's why President Macron has felt it's important for him to step up and say it is nothing to do with politics, it is all judicial, and due process must be followed.
It's interesting, isn't it? France has sort of led the way in terms of dealing with these digital businesses and trying to make them accountable.
Yeah, Telegram is one of those ones which kind of sells itself as one of those places where it's much freer, there's less content moderation. It almost works a little bit like WhatsApp, but you can have groups of much bigger than you're allowed in WhatsApp. And some of those channels are, quite dark, to say the least, that you can, kind of groups that you can join. Telegram would say that they always comply with the law.
Yes.
But I think here, the French prosecutors obviously disagree with that.
Let's move on to the front page, Jess, of your paper. And the headline has revealed staggering rise in anxiety among children. And the story by Andrew Gregory truly is staggering. This rise is very concerning.
This is an extraordinary number. More than 500 children a day in England, are being referred to NHS mental health services for anxiety. That's more than double since before the pandemic. And of course, that's something that people are going to look at as one of those kind of root causes for why there might be such high anxiety. There's very few people, apart from like young children, who experience the pandemic in such a severe way as kind of children at school who are suddenly cut off from all of their friends, isolated from their teachers, missing out on sort of very crucial years at school. Of course, the other things that people are referring to, experts analysing this data, is social media, the sort of external pressures that are put on youngsters, and the question is really whether the system can cope. And the story is, essentially saying that it can't. There were sort of 4,000, it says, referrals being referred to, almost 4,000 a week. And that's, it's extraordinary. It's really extraordinary, the numbers. And interrogating why this is happening, I think, is a really big priority.
I think social media is a massive part of it. I mean, people look to the pandemic. Certainly, that has definitely had an impact. Certainly,
well, a profound one, I think.
Absolutely, but social media, it's a bit like allowing our kids to go around taking opium. I mean, the fact is that we need to address this massive issue. Jonathan Haidt's has written a new book, The American Social Psychologist, The Anxious Generation, talking about this very issue. I mean, if people are constantly comparing themselves and looking and being very nasty, there's online cyberbullying, there's a very lack of control about what's going on. Now, there's an increasing movement amongst parents to try and ban mobile phone usage under 16. Certain schools have also banned it. But the other interesting factor, which isn't really talked about much, is also the growing prevalence of us talking about mental health can also be a bit self-fulfilling here.
Yes.
It's a little bit unpopular to say, but Sir Simon Wesley, the former chair of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, mentioned the other day that he'd gone round to meet various groups, 40 groups of university medical students, and talked to them about anxiety and depression. And what they were describing, according to him, was basically the everyday stresses of life, exam stress, this and that. The NHS was not set up to deal with these things. It was set up to deal with severe anxiety and depression. This is not to say this is not important, but it's of a different magnitude, and it's all been catch-all with mental health. We've flattened the term mental health to just include everything.
The self-fulfilling thing, which of course does not explain an awful lot of this, but you get groups of psychologists who will label things, and other groups of psychologists saying if you provide a label for some behaviour, then it sort of becomes a self-fulfilling behaviour. So it's a valid point. What comes to my mind is there is a lack of investment in support, mental health support in schools. A lot of kids, a lot of schools crying out for this. But also the Kirsty Allsop story.
Absolutely.
She's been saying, well, I've let my son go travelling at 15 to build confidence, trust helps build confidence, that kind of thing. Maybe the way, and I'm a parent as well, accosting our children is leading to some of this anxiety too.
But it's quite interesting because there's a Zoe Williams piece about exactly that, just next to this piece, which is that she says that travelling Europe age 15 is character building. And, of course, there will be people who balk at the idea of letting their 15-year-old, but ultimately the reality is it depends on the child, and and most parents would be able to tell whether their child was capable of that or not. And 15-year-olds can vary wildly in terms of their maturity. But it's just to go back to what Ali was saying. The idea that travelling around Europe on a train, seeing the sights, of course there are risks involved in that, but the risk involves when you give your child a mobile phone, which is something that a lot of parents of 15-year-olds will give to them. They're extraordinary risks as well, and we somehow don't seem to see those two things as equal.
It's a huge issue. It's a huge issue. And now you see more parents clubbing together because there's this group dynamic here. If your kid's going to be the odd one out without a mobile phone, that's going to be a problem. If everyone clubs together and says, look, we're not going to give our kids mobile phones below the age of 16 or whatever it is, that will make it more palatable. But, it's a serious problem. This is not causing happiness amongst the younger generation.
As a parent of high school-aged kids, one person gets Snapchat, they all have to get Snapchat. And in terms of travelling as a 15-year-old, I barely trust myself as a 45-year-old, to be honest with you. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, the latest tributes to Sven Eriksson.
you.